Well, shooters and reloaders out there, good evening to you. It's Fortune Cookie coming to you from the Hot Lead Zone. And this video is for Sarh Harrison, who asks, how do you use the RCBS 510 scale? How about a detailed video on how to use this scale? Well, you know, that might be good video to do, except that for a lot of reloaders it'd be kind of boring. So we're going to expand it a little bit and talk to you about reloading scales and digital scales and balance scales and this kind of thing, because most reloaders have more than one way to weigh powder charges, whether that's a balance beam scale like this OHAS 505 or this RCBS 510 or this Hornady automatic digital powder scale. Now this OHAS scale in the background is manufactured by OHAS, which is a company in New Jersey. And this is way back when. Don't know if that company is still in business or not, because you don't hear about their products anymore. But the way this one works, it has a 0 to 500 capacity on this side of the balance beam, and then a 5 grain scale on this side. So it'll measure up to 505 grains. That's why it's called the OHAS 505. Now each one of these notches is 5 grains on this side. And then each one of these little notches on this side is 1/10 of a grain. So this goes to 1/10 of a grain. So you set, for instance, suppose you want to set a charge of 53.2 grains. You would go 50 here and then go 3 and 0.2 on this side, and that's how you would set it. Now this is as old as civilization itself, the whole idea of using a balance to get a weight. And you see that here's the pivot right here where this thing seesaws. So by setting these known weights, you can determine what's going in the pan. And you know about these kind of scales because, like, Libra is the sign of the scale, and there's the scale of justice where the little statue is holding up the little balance there because of justice weighing in the balance, this kind of thing. So it's as old as civilization itself, this principle of using a balance to get a weight. Now it turns out that the RCBS 510 scale has a 510 grain capacity, and it was actually made by OHAS back in the early days, because it says here on top that it's made by OHAS for RCBS. Now I'm sure RCBS, that's located in Oroville, California, is making their own scales by now, because again, OHAS may be out of business. I don't know, I've got to check on that. And the way it works is you've got a slider here from 0 to 500 grains, and that's in 10 grain notches. And on this side you've got a 10 grain scale that also has a vernier that reads in 1/10 of a grain. So by turning this vernier, you can get 1 grain or any part of 1/10 of a grain. So Sarh Harrison, what we have here is a system that requires gravity, the operation of gravity to work. So it's a very simple system and yet very reliable. Now the way you get this thing ready to use is you've got to set this on 0, set this on 0, let the beam settle itself, and when it does, this beam establishes a level. So you don't need the other levels to determine whether the table's level or anything like this. The beam is a level. So you 0, 0, it's level, then you just adjust the little leveling screw here to get the base to read 0 to the beam. Now once you have that, then you're ready to use this scale, because it's zeroed. It's on 0, it's on 0, it's on 0. It's ready to set and determine measurements. Now the only problem is when you weigh something on this scale, is it accurate? Well, if you read the instructions, it'll tell you that the scale is accurate to within 1/10 of a grain. Now what that means is if you throw 25 grains of powder in this pen and it's on 0 and it's on 25, and you know that that's right on 0, well, that 25 grain charge in this pen is within 1/10 of a grain. So what that means is this thing is not completely accurate. When you've got a weight determined for a powder charge, it can still be off by 1/10 of a grain. Even though it's set on 0, it's set on the right charge, it's zeroed out here, you're within 1/10 of a grain. Now that 1/10 of a grain accuracy happens to be very useful for our purpose in reloading ammunition, because 1/10 of a grain of powder is fine in that kind of accuracy for our powder charges. We're not going to blow up any gun with a 1/10 charge. So this is the accuracy that we need. However, in other fields of endeavor, these are actually pretty crude. Now I recall that when I was in college at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, what happened was the chemistry class there had a balance that was made by Mettler, and it was digital, and the Mettler balance was actually accurate to like 1/10,000th of a gram. Well, if you calculate that out, that is within 1/1000th of a grain. Pretty close. Well, we don't need that kind of accuracy for powder charges. But that just shows that these are actually pretty crude. Now, a question that we often have asked, and that is, what do the bench rest shooters, what do they use? Because after all, they're interested in accuracy and accuracy and accuracy. And it turns out that the bench rest shooters, quite a few of them, a lot of them, don't bother weighing their charges. They throw their powder charges using accurate powder measures and very consistent technique, because what they want is uniformity in the volume of powder inside their cartridge cases, because that's what gives them the nice harmonic uniformity in the way the bullets exit their gun barrels, to give them the small groups. So they don't even weigh, much less use Mettler balances or anything like this. They don't weigh their powder charges. Well, some might. Now you might ask, well, how come we're going ahead and weighing them? Because most of us as reloaders, we have to be concerned with the making of safe ammunition, and the only way we can safely do it, since we may not be able to just use a powder measure properly, we want to use weight, because weight is more reliable for us with our levels of experience to create safe ammunition. So for us, safety means weighing powder charges. And as we go along, we can start doing more powder measuring. In fact, that's what the Dillons do. The progressive presses just go ahead and use powder measures. And we just do spot checks every once in a while to make sure that they're throwing the right weight for us. By the way, that Mettler digital balance costs somewhere in the neighborhood of $8,000 to $10,000. And that kind of accuracy is not necessary, because in our reloading, 1/1000th of a grain is probably smaller than the very smallest particle of gunpowder, our finest gunpowders. So you can't use that kind of accuracy. So the question we might ask ourselves is, how do we know that any one of our scales is accurate? How do we know it's not off by 3 or 4 grains? Turns out that the OHAS 505 that I have in the background, every once in a while I caught it kind of like giving me a little bit of a funny reading, because what would happen is I put the powder charge back on there and it'd be off a little bit. So that made me a little bit suspicious, so I stopped using this one, used it for about 5 years, and then I got a new one, the RCBS 510, and this one didn't do any of that. So it served me well for a long time, until I got my Dillon digital scale. I used that one for many years, and then now I have the Hornady. So how do we know if any of these is accurate at all? And that is a process called calibration. So let's talk about this idea of accuracy a little bit more before we calibrate. That is, even when these scales and this dispenser, even when they're bullseyed for a charge, they can still be off by 1/10 of a grain, because that is their level of accuracy. That's why in one of my recent videos you saw that there was disagreement between this scale and the powder dispenser was off by 1/10 of a grain between the two. And I said that's fine. Well, you might find that shocking, because how can that be fine if you're off? Well, it's because either one of them is off by 1/10 of a grain anyway. Even when they're calibrated, they can be off by 1/10 of a grain, because that is the level of accuracy that they can achieve. They're not Mettler balances. Okay, so now calibration. Calibration is done by having these weights, which are a known weight, and they're made to be accurate for that weight. This is a 10 gram, this one's a 50, and they come with a Hornady unit because you use these to calibrate this every time you use it. Well, let's go ahead and use these to calibrate these. We take the pan off, we zero it, there it is, then we press calibrate. Now when you press it once, that sets it to grams, and then you press it again, and now it's going through the calibration cycle, and it's going to ask us for a 10 gram weight. So you put it there, press calibrate again, so now it's calibrating to 10 grams. Now it's asking for the 50, so you take that one off, you put the 50 one on there, press calibrate again. And now that passed, which means that it's calibrated now. So you go ahead and put this back on here. Now we re-zero. Now let's put the 10 gram weight right here and weigh it. You get 154.4 grains. Well, it turns out that the conversion, 1 gram is 15.43 grains. Well, we're getting 154.5, or in other words, it's saying that the 15.43 grains is actually weighing 15.45 grains. Well, 1/100th of a grain doesn't make any difference. And now that I'm talking at it, it's giving us 3. So it's going between 15.43 and 15.45. So 10 grams is 154.5. It's actually 154.3, but again, the accuracy is fine. So let's go ahead and take that out of here. Now we can go ahead and use this to calibrate our scale over here. Now when we use our scales, they need to be on a table somewhere that's off the bench top, because the bench top's vibrating. You might hit it with your arm. If you hit this thing, you have to re-zero it again. But we don't have to do that, because we didn't upset the zero. So let's set this for 154. There's 100. There's 150. Now we're going to rev this thing up to 4. There's 154.3. There it is. Now we'll take this 154.3 grain weight and put it in here, and we're going to go ahead and weigh that, and you will see that it's pretty much on there. What that means is that we know that that weight weighs 154.3 grains. We set the arm for 154.3, and it's zeroing, which means that the scale says that thing weighs 154.3. So this is calibrated. Now remember now that that still means that we might have a tenth of a grain inaccuracy, because that's the limit of the accuracy of this system, no matter if it says 0 or not. But we can trust it to 1/10, and that's fine for our use in reloading. So Sarah, there you go. That's how you use the RCBS 510 scale. It's a good scale. A little slow, but the calibrated powder dispensers and digital scales are very fine to use. The companies that make them make good ones, and we can use the digital also. So I know that some of you are interested in the OHAS 505. How's it going to do when you calibrate? So I went ahead and set this scale back here for 154.3 grains, which is the 10 gram calibration. So we'll go ahead and put that there. And let's see how that one zeros. It should be off by a little bit because I predict this one to be a little bit off. Oh, it's right on. Well, what that means is that it still has a 1/10 grain error, but maybe I should have just gone ahead and kept using that one and never got the RCBS. Well, they're made by the same company anyway. As long as we calibrate, we can have confidence that all of these will suit us just fine. So, shooters and reloaders out there, hope this all helps. And Sarh Harrison, thank you very much for the suggestion to do this video. Bye for now.